very great honor to be able to have Caroline Gardiner, a graduate student at the University of Massachusetts in Boston with the Fisk Center for Archaeology, do this really amazing presentation on her study, her reevaluation of the Alden artifacts from the Robbins dig in the 1960s. As you know, the site was excavated at that time, and they did some initial assessments. There were archaeologists who reviewed the material. In later years, it went to the University of Massachusetts in Amherst for study, and it's now been moved to Boston. When Carolyn said that she wanted to study the ceramics for her master's thesis, we were just absolutely thrilled. So we welcome her, and we hope that you all will enjoy this. It gives you an intimate portrait of John and Priscilla Alden and their life here in Duxbury. Thank you.
Can everybody hear me? Hear me? Straight up in the back?
Turn it up a little.
Can you hear me now?
Louder.
Great. Well, just to start, thank you all for having me. I'm very excited to share the results of some of my research with you and hope you enjoy the presentation. So this is my very long title of my thesis project. It's the Household Activities and Areas. This is a reanalysis of the John and Priscilla Alden first home site material. Some of that material we have pulled out on this table, and after the presentation I'm happy to stay around and talk to you all about what you see up here, what the collection contains, and other things that have not been discussed in the presentation. And I'll also be taking questions after the presentation. Okay, so to get started, this is just a little overview of what you all are going to hear about today. A little bit about archaeology, what we can do for you, what the field is about, specifically historical archaeology. I term that more colonial archaeology. So people start expanding around the world in about the 1400s, starting with the Portuguese. The English get in on this. This is different from Roman, Greek, Egyptian, underwater archaeology. Those are all separate fields. So I'm a historical archaeologist. I specialize in the colonial era. The collection background, you'll hear a little bit about that. Duxbury just gave you an overview of it. We'll get in a little bit more in detail about what the collection has gone through, what people have said about it. We'll go through the project methods, so the things that I did for this project for my master's thesis, and then the findings, and hopefully what it contributes to what the Alden history is about. So archaeology. It is a tedious yet rewarding field. The picture you see here is not colonial archaeology. This is Roman archaeology. The people here are digging through a mountain of ceramic sherds. I say sherds, pieces of ceramic, basically. These are all Roman pots. And each of these pots gets to be measured, gets to be documented. You write down where you found it, what it is, what it's made out of, and then you can start to tell the story. So you go through all these little tiny pieces, you sit there for hours and hours, but then it is really rewarding in the end when you start to say, okay, this is trading things, these are what people were using, this is what people were eating. There's two things going on in archaeology right now. The field is starting to turn over. The old methods, briefly, they focus on the pretties, what I call the pretties. These are the nice big artifacts that you want to put on display. These are the things that catch people's eyes. There's a piece of porcelain up here. People always go for the bright and shiny things, which is not bad, that's fine. There's a lot of things that get left out if you're looking at only the things that you want to put into a museum. You're missing the everyday life. You're not pulling out your fancy china for every meal at home. You're pulling out your regular dinner plates, your plastic plates, your paper plates. And if you're not studying those, you're losing out on what people are doing in their normal lives. Old archaeologists, yeah, sure. A lot of times in the past years, so mid-1900s, people would only do excavations around the main house structures. So the site out here, you'll see in a minute, there are maps of it if you all have walked down there. It's just that stone foundation, that big rectangle. That was the only part of this site that was actually excavated, that they actually put shovels and trowels into ground for. Again, you're missing a lot of information. There we go. Is that better?
Is that better?
Raise the mic. Closer to you. Just a bit closer.
Better?
Better?
Can you hear that? All right, much better. Always a little technological difficulties. So people would say the main house structures. So you're missing out on the yard space. You're missing out on any outlying buildings, barns, down south, the slave plantations, the slave houses. Again, looking at only where the family lived. However, in archaeology, that field has just turned over. People have recognized these problems, and we're starting to do different things. We're starting to look at the yard space, not just the main house space. We're starting to look at those paper plates. We're starting to look at the narratives of people who haven't been talked about in history so far. So these are the slaves, the indigenous peoples, the Native Americans, the African Americans, the women, the children, the disabled. All of these narratives are starting to be talked about in this field. So these are the new methods. So that's why in my title you saw the word reanalysis. A lot of these things are not being dug up. Excuse me. Once you dig up something in archaeology, you can't go back and re-dig it. It's already gone. You've already taken it out of the ground. So what people do is go back and look at the old collections, those old boxes that have been sitting there for years and years and haven't been touched. And they're asking new questions. They're asking different things. Who is at this site? What are they doing? It's not just the rich white man in the house anymore. It's his wife, it's his children, it's his slaves, it's his neighbors. All of these things are coming into play. And we're talking about new technology in this field. So everybody has their iPhone now, which is great. You can snap a picture of the site and have that forever. We're doing other methods such as digital mapping with satellites. And we're doing 3D modeling. Everybody loves that. So you can take a couple of hundreds of pictures of one artifact. You can put it into a computer program, and you can tell the printer to print out a replica of that object. It's very exciting. Plymouth Plantation has done that. I did not do that, but there are definitely pieces in here that could be used for that. I did, however, apply some digital mapping techniques that you all will get to hear about in a second. So this turns to your archaeology. This is the first home collection. So what I wanted to do here, the point of this is not just to make you guys sit here and listen to all the details of archaeology. This is about your story, your family's story. That's really the big point of all this. But the archaeology itself comes into play with that. So as Duxbury mentioned, this collection has a big history. It was analyzed by a lot of archaeologists through the years. It originated in 1960 with Roland Robbins. He was the guy actually putting the shovels in the ground. In 1995, it was cataloged by the University of Massachusetts Amherst and the Massachusetts Archaeological Services. So a catalog is basically just a giant list of what you have, how many pieces of what kind, how many pieces of metal, how many pieces of ceramic, how many nails. It's very detailed. That's the tedious part of archaeology. 2017, I was lucky enough to be a part of this project. It was moved to my campus at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. Throughout that time, other people have written on aspects of the site, so not necessarily looking at the collection itself. They've done what's called ground penetrating radar, which is basically you shoot an X-ray into the ground, and other things, writing about the history of the site, who lived there, writing about the second home house with its architecture. But all of this to say that the site is incredible. And when I say incredible, I really mean it, because it is a purely 17th century site that is intact. You have the library over there, you have the school, you have the athletic fields, you have all of this land movement 400 years later, and there's still stuff to be said about this site. And you'll see in the presentation, some of the things are actually where they were originally deposited or broken in the site, which is really exciting. You almost never get that. My professors even said, when I proposed this project, they said, I don't know if you're going to be able to get anything out of this. If you don't, that gets something. If you do, wow. So I had these two extremes going on, and it ended up being the wow factor, which I was very excited about. Okay, so thesis questions. This is a master's thesis. This is not a PhD dissertation. A PhD is when you cover every single aspect of a site in archaeology. So you're looking at the metals, you're looking at the ceramics, you're looking at maybe the space, you're looking at the history. It's too much for a master's project. So with this one, I looked at the history of the site, and I am a nerd and freely admit it, but I love ceramics. You can take a little piece of something and you can tell a big story with it. It's kind of like a detective's story. So that's what I chose to focus on. Other people, like I said, do Native American artifacts, other people do metals. This one's all about ceramics. So you guys are going to be hearing a lot about potsherds in a minute. I say sherds, not shards. These are just a few technical terms that I want to lay the baseline for. The ceramic analysis was the first part of the thesis. The second part was the spatial analysis, which doesn't have a lot of technical terms. It's just a lot of maps. But sherds, not shards. Sherds are the little pieces of ceramic. So these guys, shards are sharp. They can cut you like a piece of glass. Sherds, more round. If you pick up one of these, it's not going to cut you. Just a note for all you word nerds out there in England, they do say shards for pottery. Over here it's sherds. Wear types is the other thing. These are what kind of ceramics you have. So at home you have your china, you have your big white dinner plates, you have, you name it, you got it, those nice like big yellow and green plates, those have their own name. The ware types over here, a couple are from Germany, a couple are from England, they all have their own names. The big one is redware. This is basically the Tupperware of the 17th century. It's easily made, easily broken, easily replaced. Redware, archaeologists like to be easy with their names. They call it redware because it's red. So that picture of the pitcher up here, which is also on the table, anytime you see the word redware, it's this stuff. Nice big hunking pieces of red ceramic. Let's see. So, going back to what archaeology is, it's a puzzle. You can go from the sherd to the ware type, so again your red wares or your English ones or your German ones. Then you start looking at the form. What is the curvature of this vessel? How big is it? Are there any bases or rims that I can try to figure out what this might have been a part of? We don't find big vessels in the ground usually, except if you work at Jamestown, where they're lucky, and they're just pulling out big sheets of armor, they're pulling out intact vessels. We don't have that here, and I'm sorry, but it's not common to find that. You have wind, water, people trampling on things. You have sherds being buried for hundreds of years. All of that means that you only have maybe one or two bits of a broken vessel. So with that, if you only have one bit of a vessel, it's kind of hard to say, okay, what is this? That's where you have to play detective, as it were, and say, okay, I'm looking at the curvature. If it's curved like this, probably a hollow vessel. If it has a glaze on the inside to keep water out, okay, well maybe it held something that was wet as opposed to dry. So little things like that. And then if you can identify the wear type, you can go to the function. A lot of the ceramics are made for a very specific purpose. So a plate, you're eating off of it. A bowl, okay, maybe that's soup, or again, to store something. These are, the picture there is a part of a pitcher. So if you can see, that little bit right there is the top of the rim of the pitcher, and it kind of slopes in, and then a big bulbous body going like that. So these are the kinds of clues that archaeologists use. So redware was often utilitarian, used for storing things wet or dry. If you have a pitcher, you can say, okay, this is indicative of beverage consumption. Or if I have a butter pot, which again has a very specific form, that's dairying. Okay, so that's the ceramic section. The second part of the questions here were spatial. So where is the stuff found on this site? Can we tell if something is in place, as in where people were cooking or where people were dairying, or is it all just a random mess of trash, of things that got thrown in once the building fell down or were demolished, or is it 400 years of Massachusetts weather messing everything up? I didn't know. That's what this was going to find out. To do that, I used a program, getting technical here, called ArcGIS Esri mapping software. GIS is Geographic Information Systems. It's basically just a digital map that can do all sorts of math and statistics within the program itself to tell you if something is random or actually in place. There we go. Okay, so starting out with the ceramic methods here. There were 3 steps that I did. The first one was to update the catalog, so that list of everything that we had. This is going sherd by sherd, so literally sitting there, picking one sherd out of a box, the next sherd out of a box. There's over 1,000 sherds in this collection, which is great. 82% of that is redware, so a little slow on that point, but still, you can tell a lot about it. And the reason I went sherd by sherd was that a lot of the archaeologists who have looked at this collection so far had not addressed ceramics specifically. There's a couple of things. Craig Chardet published a piece, and the original Roland Robbins collection had just a basic outline of what was in the collection. But again, with 82% of redware, that's your Tupperware, people haven't been focusing on that. They were focusing on the pretty pieces, the china, the other things that we knew were from Germany, the things that we knew were from England. If you look at redware, it can actually tell you a lot about the daily life. So that's what I decided to do. And then looking at the form analysis, so saying, can we find anything that is indicative of a plate, a bowl, a butter pot, there's a lot of those, a milk pan maybe, that would tell us a little bit more about dairying, which is a woman's industry. One of the things that we can do with that, another archaeology term, is an MNV, or a minimum number of vessel analysis. So bear with me here, it gets kind of tricky. That picture, if you see on the left-hand side, there's a couple of pieces that have blue and white stripes, and a couple of pieces that have purple and white stripes. We can say with pretty high level of confidence that those are 2 different vessels, one that's decorated with blue and one that's decorated with purple. Ergo, you have a minimum, at minimum, 2 vessels. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Good. A lot of this is based upon decoration, sherd thickness, glaze coloration, things like that. But it helps, you can say, okay, well now I know that they didn't just have butter pots, they had 5 butter pots. They didn't just have plates, they had 1 plate. So it helps you know where the priorities of the family were lying. And with doing that, you can say, okay, are they really investing in storage jars? These guys, I call this one the baby because, well, it's about baby sized. This is an Iberian storage jar. Huge things storing wet or dry goods. A lot of pieces in this collection. So then you can map where those things are found, again, using the GIS software. And then you can say where were these occurring within the household itself and the surrounding yard space. This is what an archaeological catalog looks like. Very detailed. Yes, yay, thank you. Somebody's excited about Excel. So every horizontal line here is at least one shirt.
Actually, I do too.
A lot of shirts look the same, so that you can group them together. But what I've done here, this is a snapshot of my actual catalog, which the museum now has a copy of. But it's where it was found, what it is, if there's decoration on it, if there's a glaze on it, where the glaze is, every possible detail that I could get out of it, I put in this catalog. It's also recorded if the shirt is a specific shape and then what that shape is indicative of. Step 2, the fun part. So the vessels that you see there, sorry, I have to kind of shuffle around a little bit here. The two on the left are examples from the Museum of London. The wine cup, the porcelain cup over there, is an example from Jamestown. These are the kinds of things that we look for in a 17th century collection. On the left and on the top are sherds that are in the Alden collection, which is very exciting. So going just one by one here, the top one, that brown and white mottled piece, is a jar from Germany. We call that Bartman or Bellarmine bottles. These were used to store wine or beer, which is basically the water of the 17th century. Everybody drank it all the time, all day long. Not necessarily getting drunk, but because the water was not safe. And also hard to get to. The bottom piece, going back. So the little tiny piece over there, it's only about this big, and it's on the table over here that you all can have a look at it later. But it's part of a medallion of one of those bottles. On the bottom, that big pan here, is this guy. This is part, so you can see the size here, it's only about the size of my hand. That is part of a milk pan. So this is starting to get into the dairying, the activities that were going on in this household. So this is making cream, making butter. Over on the right-hand side, the porcelain piece is also over here somewhere. It's this one. Very, very pretty. Porcelain is not common on 17th century sites. So this is a little mysterious. This cup was found, these sherds were found outside of the actual house foundation. So I can't say with confidence that it belonged to the Aldens. It was found on the site. There are 17th century examples, such as this wine cup from Jamestown. It's one of those ambiguous things in archaeology. It's great that we have it. It may be theirs, it may not be, but it's great to look at. So some more vessels here. These are also on the table. The top one anyway, the bottom one is not. On the right, we have another example from the Museum of London. This is a charger, like a horse charger. Those are big display plates. You're not eating off of these. You're setting them on a table, standing up, or you hang them on a wall. Very decorative, very colorful. And we call these tin glaze. They're very, very fragile. And on the left, we have an example of one of those. On the bottom, on the right, we have an example of a Rhenish stoneware cup. So from Rhineland, we call this stoneware. It's a little bit thicker, a little bit less porous than other kinds of ceramic. But again, this is showing us that there is trade going on. The Aldens were bringing this stuff on the Mayflower with them, or getting it from supply ships coming back. And this one's interesting because it's in an individual drinking vessel. The Bartman bottle, that big brown and white spotted one before with the medallion on it, that's a group drinking vessel. Here we have an individual mug, which is really exciting. And some more vessels. On the bottom is that Iberian storage jar, so that's this guy. And on the top is just another example of redware. This is a butter pot, so going back to the idea of dairying, which in the 17th century was a women's, pretty much only women's industry. So this is showing us a glimpse about what Priscilla and the children would have been doing on a daily basis. And every so often we get a few surprises. Whereas we're focused mainly on telling the Alden story, there is another story here to be told. This shirt is also on the table for later look. But if you look very carefully, right in there, we have some fingerprints. These are very interesting. This is of the potter. So this is the potter's story, somebody who made this, not the Aldens themselves, but still just a glimpse in the past to a time to a very specific individual. All right, so all of that, the findings from those, this is a very typical 17th century collection. It's having all the wear types, so English-made ones that you can just whip up in a second. We have Rhenish ones, we have German ones. It's showing all this trade going on between these countries at that time. It's showing us what the Aldens were getting from England, just as regular yeoman-style traditions. It's showing us what England is doing in terms of trade, and it's showing us a glimpse about what the Aldens were eating and drinking during that time. So a lot of beer, a lot of wine, and also a lot of dairying items. There's also a few Native American shirts, and I do want to mention these. They are important. I did not focus on the Native American artifacts for this thesis. There is one up here that I can point out to you all later. But this site, like many Massachusetts sites, is built on top of a Native American land. The Native Americans were here for thousands of years before the English settled. They were all over this area. All of their things, we're still finding them when we're excavating in Plymouth, and they are present within this collection. So I don't want to leave that out. There was a lot of interaction going on between these groups. The collection is dominated by redware, so again, that Tupperware. This is a very typical English yeoman style, again, traditions. When you're doing a lot of dairying, you're living on a farm, you don't have a lot of that porcelain. You're just living day-to-day lives, using it for the things that you need to do every day. And thank goodness there's a lot of things that are represented, individual and group drinking vessels, the dairying items, like I said, cooking items, so a lot of pans, pots, and what I called other. These are the charger, that big display plate, and a couple of candlesticks, believe it or not, which are very interesting. It doesn't look like much, but the bottom picture is part of the bottom of a candlestick, so a very, very shallow little pan, and then the candlestick would have come right out of that. The charger, so again, that big blue and white piece, and the porcelain cup perhaps might have been used to show off status. So John was very well known in the colony. People might have been coming to his house. To have a big display plate like that that's nice and bright and colorful, as well as a porcelain cup that's very expensive, very easily broken, might have shown off how well known that he was in the colony. Okay, enough about ceramic terms. I can see some people are starting to glaze over here. This is where this is found in the household. So the house isn't very big at all. So I was very skeptical as to if this could be something or if it was just a pile of everything put together. As you'll see, thank goodness, it is the former. We do have patterns. So everybody's seen one of these, yes? This is a hotspot or a gradation map. So everybody knows what it is. The red is indicative of hot spots, where the temperature is higher. The blue is where it's lower. We can apply the same thing to the Alden house. And this is what we get. So this is a picture. I'll give you all a minute to get oriented here. The bottom picture over there, the cellar is on the far end, so looking towards the trees, and the cellar is on the left hand on the top. There's a problem with this collection. In the 1960s, when Robbins was excavating it, he didn't record vertically. He only recorded horizontally. So he basically laid a chessboard over the site and divided it into little squares, and then said, okay, I have so many pieces from this square. I have so many pieces from this square. And he didn't say how deep in the ground they were found. That's a problem in archaeology because there's a rule that says the deeper you go, the deeper you are in time. So if something is found lower down, it's probably used or discarded before the thing that was on the top. We don't have that here. So it really puts us onto a 2D playing field. With the exception of the cellar, we didn't get much out of that anyway. It was only divided into 3 levels, and there was no difference between those 3 levels. The only thing that we can say about this cellar is that there were a lot of nails in it, and a lot of ceramics, but a lot of nails, so there was probably a wooden floor covering that area. Just at first glimpse, you can already see that there are some things happening within the household itself. Never mind the cellar, it's a big jumble of stuff, but within the rest of it, there are patterns, which we were not expecting. So the map that I just showed you is where all of the ceramics were found. You can also break it up by wear type, form, so plate, bowl, cup, things like that, and function, so cooking, dairying, those big glimpses into everyday life. On the left is a picture of the redware count. On the right is a picture of the non-redware, basically everything else. Redware composes, like I said, 82% of the collection, so all of the patterns of everything else were being obscured by the redware. So I drew them out, and on the left-hand side, you can see the redware gathers in the back end of the house in a very long linear pattern. Linear patterns don't happen naturally. They just don't. So we know that something is going on with that immediately. And the non-redware seems to be gathering in the middle of the house, which is interesting. So don't worry about this. It's kind of scary. I'm terrified by math. But there are 2 things that are going on here. The local Moran's eye is one test, and it says, where are there units with higher or lower counts of ceramics based upon its neighbors? So if you have a spot with very little ceramics, you would probably expect the immediate neighbors to have no ceramics as well. It's just the same thing in real estate. If one house has a very high value, you would probably expect the houses around it to have similar-ish values. The other test here is going by the ordinary least squares regression analysis. That's a mouthful. It basically says, can we predict where one variable is based upon another variable? So can we predict where non-redwares are based on redwares? Can we predict where dairying vessels are based on cooking? There are 2 clusters going on. There's a cluster in the central north, so where this pink area is, right in there. And on the right-hand side, where all the red ones are, is the south center. So interpretations of that. I just threw a lot of data at you, so let me try to bring it back and show you the importance of all of this. So we have cluster 1. This is the big cluster. This is a lot of ceramics in the middle of the household. This is likely, and I emphasize likely because there are no absolutes in archaeology. You can't say this was John Alden's, bowl, cup. This is something that is found on the site that would have been used at that time period. So yes, likely it was his, but there's no JA stamped on this. This is likely a hall or a kitchen based upon accounts of other houses during that time period. They have a tripartite division, so three rooms in one part of the house, The center room is where everything happened. It's those medieval halls that you hear about where there's cooking, there's dancing, there's feasting, all of this stuff happening in one area. So they're cooking, they're dairying, maybe sleeping, you don't know. So that's the center of the household where a lot of things are happening. We can't say anything about over the cellar. We don't have the floor there. It's just a big hole. Again, likely there was a wooden floor over that, but because we don't have that ground surface, I'm not confident in saying this absolutely happened in this room. The right-hand side, so the eastern half of the house, or eastern third of the house, is interesting. There's not a lot of ceramics there, so we can say, okay, probably more activity was happening in the middle of the household. This might have been a room used for sleeping or storing things such as linens. So that central pattern, you can divide it into the north and the south. The redware gathers along the north, and again, it's that linear line across the back of the house. Linear line, redundant there. It's that line across the back of the house. There are accounts that we know of people sweeping out of a back door. That looks like what's going on here. There's that big dark red cluster in the middle of the house towards the northern end. Maybe there was a back door there. There's no evidence for this in the foundation, but it would make sense given the pattern that we have here, given the plans of other households of the time. The non-redwares, so all the other ceramics, gather to the south center of the house. This is likely what we call an activity area. That's a very vague term. It basically means something is happening in this space. What that something is depends upon the case. Multiple vessels are broken here. So again, going back to that M&V analysis of, okay, I have so many purple vessels, so many blue vessels. In here, I had so many vessels of one type and so many vessels of another. They're all broken in one spot. There's a lot of pieces of one vessel in one spot. That's incredible. That means that the thing was being used in that spot, broken there, trampled into the floor. They had a dirt floor probably back then. You wouldn't really care about those big shards. They're not going to cut you. Like I said, they're not glass shards. They just got left in the floor. And this is great because Will and Robin said that there was a hearth, a cooking area, right there. So all of these ceramics, all of these broken pots and things are breaking in the spot where he thought the people were cooking. Makes sense. Okay. So just to sum up, we have three things going on here. We have a trash disposal method, so people are sweeping. The Aldens, the children, are sweeping against the back door. There's a cellar with a possible wooden floor on the western side of the house. There's a middle room with multiple areas, multiple activities. And there's a third room possibly for storage. This is interesting because it aligns pretty well with the outline of this house. So you can see in the top part of that map there, the analysis there, I said that there was what they called a boarding room, a kitchen in the middle, again where everything was happening, and then a buttery on the other side. I don't know if those names are quite accurate, but you can again see that the plan is just 3 rooms in about the same dimensions, almost pretty much exactly the same dimensions as the first home. So this is great. We can now start telling the Alden story, your story. So we have how the house was built, maybe rooms, which we didn't have before. This is also adding, on the archaeological side, there's a very few what they call first period structures still around here, so 17th century structures. We can start, once we get more data out of these, we can really get into how these people were living in their day-to-day lives in their very households. We have the daily life aspects, we have cooking and perhaps the hearth area. We have beverage consumption of individually owned mugs. We have the group vessels that the family would have been sharing at dinner time, drinking that beer and the wine. We have storage items like the Iberian storage jars. So they had a big family and harsh Massachusetts winters. So again, storage jars is very important. We have possible personal display items, which is the porcelain, the big colorful charger, and we have dairying items, which gets into the children and Priscilla, those narratives that have been forgotten up until this point. And there's more, which I did not do, but research should be applied to this site. There's so much to be done. I cannot stress enough how important this is. There's excavation, possible excavation to be done. So digging out those, literally digging out those trowels and those shovels again. The map that you see here, it's kind of hard to see, but the big black line is where the house foundation is. That's where Robbins and his team were digging into the ground. They did what's called surface collection for the rest of the site. So they weren't digging down into the ground there. They were just walking over and picking up ceramic sherds and glass and nails and whatever else. Just out of curiosity, I mapped where the nails and the glass were found, window glass. Other people have used this to show where architecture might have been on households, and it's all to the south end. And you can see all those orange and yellow boxes. So that maybe shows that there was another half of the house that we don't know about yet to the south end. Very cool. To do that, the excavators will come in, if we can get them, and they would be looking for what are called post holes. So these are big circular stains in the soil about where somebody dug a hole, put a big wooden post in, and then over time those posts have decayed in the ground, there we go, over time in the ground, and you can literally play connect the dots. And that's how Monticello and Jamestown have excavated their houses so far. That's how you know how big the houses were. Maybe there's evidence of that here. There's also other artifact classes. So like I said, I only focused on the ceramics. There's metals, a lot of really rare gun pieces, a lot of coopering items, nails, and there's a lot of native artifacts as well, which is the other half of the story that still hasn't been told. We can also start comparing those with other sites. Plymouth Plantation is one that has digitized their collection. They're starting to do 3D modeling, all these things, and it would be great for this site, for them, for all the other outlying houses over here, to unify their collections into one database. That way people like us can just come in, academics and not, just to say, okay, how big was this house? How many people were living in it? Okay, how does that compare to this house? Same time period, but very different things going on between these houses. And the big picture at last. So again, the site, the archaeology, the point of all this is not just to be a geek and nerd out over the Excel tables. That's my job. But we can also start to narrate the story of what do these little tiny puzzle pieces in the ground, what can that tell us about what this family was doing, what your family is doing 400 years ago. Plymouth has been mythologized over time. There's a lot of folklore going on, which is great. It's the American story. But you also have to focus on the day-to-day lives. What were they actually doing? What was everyday life like for them back then? And then weave those together to get the big picture of Plymouth. That's it. So thank you very much. Yeah, right. And anybody has any questions?
Just to say, I love your enthusiasm.
Thank you.
Because we're all connected gene-wise, and you have this enthusiasm. And it suggests that we should be looking for the culture.
Yes.
We've always wondered how they had this family in 38 by 10 feet.
Yes, yes. Well, they built up. Is how they did it. But yes, I would strongly recommend that. And I know I threw a lot of data at you guys, so I apologize if there's anything that you want me to go back to. I'm more than happy. Ma'am, I saw your hand first.
When do we believe the redware pottery was being made here in this country?
In this country.
Massachusetts.
Right. So that gets into the later 17th century. So the things, so the things that you see in this collection were likely brought on the Mayflower directly or on the supply ships that start coming in a few years after 1620.
Is there really a ground penetrating radar to the south there to establish we need? I've been told I'm full of hot air before.
So,
Is there any evidence other than the presence of the shards?
sure, very good.
Well, it seems to me, and I'm an armchair reporter on it, that the footprint of that house with all those, the family size, something else must have been moved.
Yeah, so it is a very small house. However, there are other houses documented that were that size. So this is just a guess. This is me being nerdy and say, go take, go take. Ground penetrating radar is tricky. They have done it on that site. They said that there were what they called anomalies, not surrounding that direct area. However, you can't see with ground penetrating radar. Post holes don't show up on it. So there's no way to know if there was something there that we call earth-fast structures, so those posts in the grounds, unless you take shovel to ground to see it.
But if you see dairy vessels, wouldn't that indicate there's some kind of barn over there in addition, or suggest maybe?
If you see, again, that's tricky. So dairying, you often you want to have both artifacts and architecture at the same time before you say, yes, definitely this was a barn, yes, definitely this was a dairy. Right now, all we have are the dairying artifacts that were in the house itself, so obviously they were dairying. Whether there was an outline structure, we don't know. Because again, the ground penetrating radar, they did see some things, but it's only good at seeing certain things. Tree roots, I've had a lot of experience with that. There's stone foundations that it likes, but again, it's basically just the frequency of the radar, and it's not like a metal detector that says, okay, there's definitely metal here. It says there's something here. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's archaeological, as in culture-related, people-related, or geological. So a rock formation, a root formation, things like that.
Is there anything in the offing now to go back over there and start taking anything?
Yeah.
Not yet. But I know my team at the FIS Center would be more than happy to get in on that. Any other questions? Yes.
I heard that after the house was abandoned, it might have been filled in so that people or cows wouldn't trip and break their legs or anything like that. Is there anything you found in your analysis that either indicates it was filled in or in some way would affect the analysis that you did?
Yes, so that goes back to the horizontal versus vertical question. We don't have that vertical data.
Right.
Everything's just horizontal, with the exception of the cellar. So the cellar is definitely, I shouldn't say definitely, it looks like it was a fill episode. So they excavated it in what they call arbitrary layers. So they did, okay, this first 3 feet, I'm going to call layer 1. The second 4 feet, I'm going to call layer 2. And then that last 6 inches, just to distinguish the cellar from the ground itself, from the natural ground, I'm going to call layer 3. We did look at the distribution of artifacts in that, so saying, okay, are there more 17th century items at the very bottom and later 17th century items at the top that would show that it was filled in over time? It just didn't work out. The math was no different. There were no exceptions. Everything was basically, all the distributions of the artifacts were exactly the same, except for the nails. There were a lot more nails in the cellar than one would expect. That's why we're saying that's probably indicative of the floor that got collapsed. So the cellar is the only place that I have the vertical data. That's the only place that I'm confident in saying, yes, it was probably just one filling episode.
Were
Yes.
there a lot of glass shards in the house? You said-
So I didn't
you said
look
outside.
at, so all I did with the glass was look at the very basic catalog and say, okay, let's just make just a simple visual map of where this stuff is in the yard space and the house. I did the house as well. A lot of the glass was found to that north central part of the house, so where I was talking about where the back door might have been. So again, that makes sense. People are sweeping those sharp shards, try saying that 10 times fast, out that back door to get them out of the house.
I was just thinking about if you used the surface to fill a hole, might that have had glass?
Right, which is why they say you can probably map where the architecture is based on where the glass and the nails are found. And why it was so significant that we found the patterns in the ceramics as well, because if it was all just one dumping, you would see glass, you would see nails, you would see ceramics all mixed together, and it just wasn't. So that was a hint that, yay, it's not just a dumping site. People just didn't come in and just tear everything down. This is actually where these things were being used in the household.
Okay, I'll throw another question.
No, keep going.
Do you think it was likely that they were living on dirt floor or wood floor, or is it impossible to know?
So over the cellar, I would say likely a wooden floor, given the number of nails that we found. The other contemporary houses do have dirt floors, and given that the ceramics are in very specific places, especially around that hearth, or possible hearth is what he called it, I would say that they had a dirt floor.
Comfortable.
One would think, but if you walk over a dirt floor many, many times, it's just like walking on a hill or something. You see all those paths that people have been trotting in over time. It becomes very, very compact. And that's a trick that our excavators use when they're going through the ground. When you're scraping dirt away with a shovel or a trowel, it changes in the consistency of the dirt. When people are walking on it, this site was probably used for 60 or 70 years, it tramples it very, very down pat. So it's not as uncomfortable. It's not like you were walking around every day with dirt all over you because it was just so flowy in the wind and everything.
Just thinking more the moisture seeping up in the winter.
It could. We don't have the house structure anymore, so you never know.
How many items were excavated?
We're excavated total? That I don't know. There are over 1,000 pieces of ceramic. About 1,000, I think 1,032 or 1,132, something like that. And there's a lot of nails, thousands upon thousands of nails, a lot of other metal items. Less than 9,000 artifacts, I think, total, but definitely a lot for a house that size.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you.